But of course, we and people inside the system have said to me that we cannot be 100% sure that there are no backdoors.
Okay, here's where it starts to go pear-shaped. So what he's talking about here, backdoors and blah blah blah. So in 2017, there was a meeting held somewhere in Canary Wharf area. Shaykh Tarek was there, Shaykh Haddad was there, other individuals were there. I myself was invited somehow. I don't know how I got my name on there, but I was invited. And some ETH developer was also invited to explain to everyone there what is blockchain in order to facilitate and allow us to come to a conclusion about Bitcoin, about cryptocurrencies. And one of the things that came up was this topic here. Are there any backdoors, or can you guarantee there's no backdoors into Bitcoin that could potentially bring the whole system down? And the guy said, no, we can't guarantee that. And he went as far as to say, yeah, and the biggest cryptocurrency or crypto developers are Israeli Jews. Now, so basically what he said here, seems to be reminiscent of what was actually asked by himself and what the person said to him in that meeting. Now, this is where one needs to do their homework into how Bitcoin works. And it's not good enough just to take things on face value when someone just tells you something. Now, what is meant by backdoors? So if you have a computer, for example, like you have Windows or Mac OS or Linux, these are all operating systems in the computer. No one knows how these, well, let's ignore Linux, because Linux is open source. Let's look at Mac OS and Windows. No one knows if Microsoft or if Apple have actually placed within the code certain keys or certain functionalities that allows remote users or allows someone else access to your private computer without your knowledge. So, for example, when I think some terrorist guy did some crime and they managed to seize his iPhone, and the FBI asked the iPhone to unlock his phone, and Apple basically refused. Them saying they refuse basically means they have the capacity, because they are basically, it's called security through obscurity. The system is secure because you don't know how to get access to it. It doesn't mean there is no access to it. And there is definitely we have got a way to access it because we know how the system works. But because you don't know how the system works, you're prohibited, or you're prevented from accessing it. Security through obscurity. That's the meaning of a backdoor. A way to access the system that is not obvious to you. Now, if you know how Bitcoin works, you realize that question doesn't really make sense, or that the risk factors are not what you think it is. So, for example, as one example, there's one video I want to reply to later on. I mentioned that the NSA, which is a US government organization, they made the hashing algorithm SHA-256, and Bitcoin mining uses SHA-256. So basically, they suggested that Bitcoin was actually a government plot using SHA-256, and they have a backdoor into Bitcoin. I mean, they're ready, going to shut it down. Okay, let's assume that NSA does have an ability to, or they have something inside SHA-256 that gives them special access or special privileges, whatever that means. What is SHA-256 even used for? It's used to find a hash, just a number. And if there was a backdoor into the algorithm, or what does that do? What advantage does that give you? All it gives you is the ability to mine blocks faster than anyone else. The system still functions, even if you have a backdoor, the system still functions. I mean, Anyway, I don't want to go too long this because I've got videos. I would say refer to my videos about how mining works, how the Bitcoin network works. I have plenty of videos. One referring to, I have a series of how mining actually works. I have a series about how wallets work and private keys and public keys and all that. Basically, Bitcoin is a collection of loads of technologies that we use in email and everything we use security-wise. So the most important thing to recognize here is that Bitcoin's protocol is open source. Every line of code is readily available and is known to all. So the idea of a backdoor doesn't make too much sense because we have thousands, tens of thousands of people scouring over the code, analyzing line by line, looking at ways to improve the code. If there was a backdoor, it would be seen. Unlike Apple's operating system where it's closed and we can't see it, that's what's meant by a backdoor. So my first objection to the Sheikh so far, this is the first time in this whole thing, is that, well, actually not the first time, but is that this idea of the backdoor, it was mentioned in that meeting, but it wasn't mentioned how, because the meeting didn't really go too well because it wasn't really well explained by the ETH developer. But the point is, this threat or this risk of a backdoor in Bitcoin isn't what you think it is, and isn't really there even. And let's just assume that NSA did have some kind of way to manipulate hash 256. It's not very difficult to move to another hashing algorithm. And it's not difficult. You just literally, there's a few lines of code. I mean, you use maybe SHA 5, I don't know, what is it, 552? I don't know what it is, or whatever the next one up. But there's so many, there are many hashing algorithms that can be used. And it's not easy to change. Bitcoin is constantly being changed since its inception. And if there are any bugs, it's not that difficult to fix. And if you can imagine, there's definitely incentive to fix it because it's a global network. Everyone's got money in it. Everyone who builds on Bitcoin uses Bitcoin. Anyway, just put my point out there.
That somebody isn't watching the transactions that are happening within the system.
So another risk, he says, maybe someone might be watching the transaction in the system. And this kind of leads me now to believe that maybe, and I'm saying maybe, I don't know. It's not criticism. I'm just saying it seems to be that the Sheikh hasn't really gone beyond what was said in that meeting in understanding how Bitcoin works. I could be wrong because he has mentioned that he has read the Bitcoin standard, so I could be wrong. But it seems as though maybe he hasn't gone that much further to understand the inner workings of Bitcoin, hence why he has these cautionary objections. Because being able to monitor someone's transaction, everyone knows that. That's how Bitcoin works. It's an open blockchain. The movement of every single coin can be monitored back to where the coin was issued. So it's not a bug, it's a feature. That's how we can guarantee that there will be never more than 21 million Bitcoin, because you can see where every single Bitcoin came from in the network. There you go.
So, we have to be, I think, willing to accept that there are some unknowns there. Nevertheless, I think if we were then as, advisors to speak to people who are thinking to invest, to take the role of an investment manager, then one would ask the question, look, it may be permissible, but is it wise to go into this? And people who've read the history of the Dutch tulip boom will know how herd mentality can take over. And if one is a scholar, one has a duty to people to say, look, there is a speculative mania going on. Tulip bulbs are not worth $1 million each. This will all be over in a few years and you'll lose everything. And if there is this subsidiary economic issue, we're not dealing with principles now, we're just asking the question, have people gone mad? Are they paying too much for this digital record, right? Then I think any scholar, any person has the right to make that commentary. He has the right to say, look, guys, prices are too high, this has been whipped up and, and who's to deny that? I mean, you can make an economic argument both ways, right? So I think that kind of argument we have to separate out. I don't think it's probably relevant to what you want to talk about. We need to talk about the principles, the legal issues surrounding, what is this thing that one is buying and selling.
So, like I said, I think Shaykh Tarek is conflicted. Because earlier on he mentioned that volatility is not an issue, but yet he makes the case that, scholars have the right to be cautious is Bitcoin worth that much? Price is going up, is going to come back down again. So again, back to the issue of volatility. So we see here this issue that he defends Bitcoin and the objections against Bitcoin, or speaks against the objections against Bitcoin, but yet he recoils back to defending the scholars who object to Bitcoin. So I think it's just an issue of being overly cautious. Because again, as he mentioned, I will refer back to the issue he mentioned about the price volatility. But for price volatility, that isn't the issue. That isn't a issue. And prices, as he gave an example of the hadith where the prices of things went up time Mr. Allah. So he's acknowledged that the price volatility is an issue. But again, some scholars might say the price of Bitcoin is too high. So my take on that line or train of thought is that this is where I believe scholars, muftis and mustaftis, those who give fatwa and those who ask fatwa, need to recognize what's being said. Investment advice is not legal ruling. Saying it's best not to get involved in Bitcoin does not mean Bitcoin is haram. Listen carefully. Saying Bitcoin is probably going to come down in price, it's going way up, that is one thing. That's advisory. I think now is not the good time to get involved in Bitcoin. Looking at Bitcoin as an investment opportunity. Remember what I said to you earlier on? If you see Bitcoin only as an investment, this is the conversation you're going to have. That's one discussion. But that's not a legal discussion. How can one say it's haram to buy something purely because it's the wrong price point? Can you possibly say it's haram to buy petrol from those petrol stations on the motorway because the prices are like 10 pence more than the normal shops? Extortionately more? Can you say it's haram to buy a white t-shirt from Louis Vuitton because no white t-shirt is worth 100 quid? Irresponsible? Maybe. Dumb? Possibly. Haram? And this is where I think we need to make that vivid distinction. I don't believe it's possible that any scholar can say something is haram to buy because that scholar doesn't agree with that price when the market has put it at that price. Listen carefully. The independent, individual view of the scholar can't really trump the view of the market because the markets determine prices. That's why we have something called price discovery. So he can say, I don't think it's a good price point right now. That's a valid point. But to say it's haram because it's, in his view, overpriced. But back to the point. I think, we see the Shaykh is now recoiling back. He's showing his interest to Bitcoin, but he's recoiling back to safety. The safety of what other ulama have said and waiting for other ulama to give permission. And that's a fair point if someone wants to do that. That's a fair position to take. If only we had other halal alternatives for money. If fiat was halal, in the sense that it wasn't based on riba, then by all means. But we have that issue to deal with. Anyway, let's move on.